All right, this is the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. Ed Carbajal here with Matthew Hawkins, the eve before the eve of New Year's Eve. Returning guest today is marketing guru, he who walks behind the rows himself, and new managing editor of the Brawl Network, Hunter Homistek is back with us. Hunter, how are your holidays, man?
Awesome, dude. Always good to get with family. You know, it's a little weird this year. I think it was weird for everybody this year. So it wasn't, the normal powwow that it usually is, but it was a good time, man. And what I love the most is like how much my intro changes every time we're here. Like today I'm marketing guru and he who walks behind the rows. I think that part's constant, which I appreciate, but I like that I'm keeping it fresh and always moving.
Awesome. Well, you look to be getting back into the MMA world of media. Why don't you tell the fans kind of some of the breaking news from the last couple of weeks?
For sure, man. And I appreciate you guys having me on to discuss that. Funny enough, it was not something that I was looking for. It came to me. I was doing my thing. I was kind of helping some local brands and things like that. Like you said, marketing guru. I have kind of a digital marketing background, as well as my background in journalism and specifically MMA journalism. So have all these different tools floating around, and just the Brawl Network came to me actually and said that they were looking to launch an MMA podcast. And I just, it's one of those things, man. I'm sure you guys have gotten offers like this throughout where it's like, sometimes things just make sense. Like they didn't have to discuss the position any further than that. They said, we need an MMA podcast. If you can get a co-host, bring them. Instantly, my brain goes, Dwayne Finley, old Bo. Like this should have happened back at Flow Combat. I always felt like when we were rocking everything at Flow Combat and just jamming on all cylinders and just grooving, I always felt like we should have had a podcast or something similar. But like the minutia of the day-to-day job, as you guys know, and like MMA journalism, like you just don't always have time to do those passion projects that maybe don't bring money back right away. So with the Brawl Network, they already have everything established, and we just need to step into that role. So that they took all the legwork out. They've been awesome setting everything up, man. And they're as pumped about it as we are. So that's the other thing, is when you get with other like-minded creative people that all have their juices going, they're all jazzed on it, just makes you that much more excited. So when I knew that Dwayne and I had the chance to step in and do it the right way, do it, that came off a little wrong because I'm super proud of Flow Combat and I have no ill will towards Flow Sports at all. And what we did there was amazing. But to be able to take that next step now and really flesh it out, because, dude, one of the funniest things, and this probably won't surprise you guys at all, but like Dwayne and I texted over the years since leaving Flow, and we'd always like remember the good moments at Flow and be like, man, if we could have just like kept that go, if it could have just been this, if we could have just taken it to the next level, like what could that have been? Like we've always wondered what we could have done together. So now we don't have to wonder anymore. Like now we get to actually go for it and finish this thing, do it the right way. So that for me on a personal level, that's what's super exciting about this. And to be involved with the Brawl Network in general, when I was away from MMA, I was covering NFL football, the Steelers. I was covering the Pittsburgh Pirates, MLB. So I was in other professional sports reporting, and all of that is also under the Brawl Network umbrella. So it just feels like the job that was made for me in a way. Like this super fits my experience and my skill set. So I'm just excited to join that team and get jamming, man. But yeah, so Dwayne Finley and I, Bow and Glow MMA show is here finally. And it is called the Bow and Glow MMA show, by the way. I made sure to keep that.
Wasn't it? I feel like it was supposed to be like Glow Up with Bow and Glow or something like that. But as long as the Bow and Glow is in there, that's funny. You talked about the other things that they do. I mean, that was one of the things when you made I know you made the announcement along with Dwayne on social media that you guys were going to be coming back in 2021 to the combat sports space. But I instantly saw. Of course, I followed the Brawl Network and started looking at their stuff. And you just mentioned, I mean, it's funny. It's called Brawl, but they do football. They cover all kinds of sports, which you kind of already did when you were doing with the stuff with, I forget the Pittsburgh thing that you used to, but like, I mean, you were heavily already doing football, baseball. So it's kind of like it's bringing all your favorite things all together in one little pot. So, I mean, I would imagine they were familiar with, they've been following you with all Pittsburgh stuff, and that's kind of why they reached out to you. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's exactly it, man. I mean, it was funny because one of their main guys, and I'm sorry, I don't know his position right now. One of the C-suite guys there, his name is Michael Shoddy, and he used to work at Bleacher Report at the same time that Dwayne and I were writing for Bleacher Report. But he was the first Bleacher Report lead writer ever, I'm pretty sure. He's told this story a couple times. I'm sorry if I get the details wrong, Shoddy. Don't sue me. I'm pretty sure he was like the first guy that ever got paid to write for Bleacher Report. So he's kind of like this old school Bleacher Report alum. And he had known about me from Bleacher Report and from DK Pittsburgh Sports. And that's kind of what started the conversation. So it was just funny how that networking works, man. But you're dead on with that because it is like the perfect fit for me. And it's funny that he comes from Bleacher Report because it's pretty obvious. Like already I'm 2 weeks into the Brawl Network. It's pretty obvious that like the vibes are similar to that, or like a Flow Sports kind of space, like this startup trying to take over the space, you know, balls to the wall attitude and just being proud of your work. And that for me has always been it. I mean, Ed, you definitely know that just from talking to me at Flow Combat when we were there. Like I was always trying to push the bar creatively and do things that my team would be proud of. I wasn't concerned whether it got 500 reads or 80,000 reads. You know, of course, if it got 80,000 reads, I was stoked about that. But if it got 500 reads and we were super proud of what we did and we could grow on it and we really did something different, unique in the space, I was just as proud of that. So I feel like that's very important, and Brawl Network definitely understands that early on. So that's cool. It's going to be a good space for us to be creative, but also kind of make waves and get that exposure that I feel like we can still achieve.
Are you going to be able to continue as much with all your other coverage of all the other sports? And will that be with the Brawl Network, or do you still have your other outlets that you'll continue to work with?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I'm still actually writing about the Steelers for Brawl Network now as well. So that's just at my will, though, right now, honestly. Like, I kind of just have free reign to do what I want. But I left DK Pittsburgh Sports back in June to start my own thing, my Homistek.com thing, my marketing, consulting, and all that. And that's not going away. Like, I'm keeping all my same clients and everything in the local Pittsburgh region. So Brawl Network is really just getting added to my mix. So as I continue to kind of develop my brand and do this thing, it's just going to be another part of the mix. But if things go as planned, you know, it may take over in a year or two and just be my full-time thing. We don't know right now. Obviously, we can't predict these things, but I do know that Bo and Glow get together. We're not going to half-ass anything. So we can't go anything but 120 miles an hour. So I know how it's going to get, and I'm excited for that and excited to see where that goes.
Well, that's one thing. I mean, as far as, I mean, since you guys kind of stepped away, when you and Dwayne stepped away from combat sports, the one thing I noticed as far as, I mean, and again, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I mean, everybody just kind of regurgitates the same fucking news and stuff. And this is our podcast, so I'm allowed to curse. So, nice. but you know what I mean? Like people regurgitate the same news from the same sources, MMA fighting, blah blah blah, and then everyone just keeps doing their own little version of stuff like that. The thing that I remember that what drew me to you guys when you guys were over at Flow was you guys were just unique storytellers, a lot of positive energy. Even for anything difficult, it was still a good what's the word I'm looking for? It was nice insight to a story that was happening at the time.
Right.
So I feel like that's something you can say whether you agree or not. I don't know how you feel about coming back into the space if you're not trying to rub anyone the wrong way. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I feel like that's something that's been missing this whole time. And with you guys coming back, I just feel like it's almost like, it's funny because I remember I talked to Dwayne about it through text or something maybe a year or two ago. Because I actually haven't talked to him lately, but it's almost like do you remember the end of The Dark Knight? when Commissioner Gordon tells his kid, like, why are they chasing him? And it's like, you know, like, so like it's like you guys left because things got so shitty, and now it's like Gotham City needs you again. You know what I mean? So,
hey, I'm honored. And for once, like, you know me with the movie references, I never get them. I get this one. Like, you got a hit. I finally saw a movie that somebody's talking about. That's great. But yeah, man, I mean, I definitely understand completely what you're saying, and I agree. And like I said, I wasn't looking for this job. So it wasn't necessarily like I had this burning desire to like get back into MMA, but it was once I knew the opportunity was on the table and really started thinking about it. And that's when, like, I was pitching it, and right away, he was all in instantly. I can't even explain how excited he was to find something like that as well, because like I said, we texted each other all the time, and it was always like Uncle Rico, if Coach would have put me in back in '83, we'd be killing it right now. Like, it was always reliving the things that we missed, even instead of celebrating our victories that we definitely had along the way as well and felt good. It was more so what we left on the table and just the kind of people we are that bothered us. So that's always been something that, we left out there. So now we get the chance to actually go back, go for it. And like you said, man, the creative energy is not going to change. Like, it does center around the podcast for sure. It's going to be more podcasting than we ever have done. So I'm excited by that challenge, first of all, but we can also write. Like, we're also still going to be telling the stories and doing the same types of things that way. There hasn't been any discussion about a road trip, but I'm not saying that's off the table either. I don't know. We don't know where this thing's going, and that's kind of what's so exciting. So the door's open for us, man. I'm really excited to get it. And like you said about the MMA media landscape in general, it really hasn't changed much in that regard. And being on kind of when I was working for DK Pittsburgh Sports, and I got to see, high level national reporting. The funny thing is that the principles don't really change at that level. I think maybe last time I was on the podcast, we talked about this a little. If we did, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but it was kind of like the same principles apply. Like, I still see people chasing clicks all the time, and I chase clicks all the time because my boss liked clicks. That's money. That's money in his pocket. So I understand the business side of it. And I understand why people want clicks, but it's about finding that happy medium of things that are compelling because they're just that damn good. Like, that is where you want to be. And I understand how hard that is. I understand how time consuming that is. That's what I'm hoping we can carve out here, to where the content is just so good that it's getting clicks by nature of its quality, not because, Diego Sanchez just showed his schlong on OnlyFans or whatever's happening right now. I'm not saying I subscribe, Diego. It's not
Well, with saying all of that, are there any fights or fighters or any storylines that you look forward to, without giving away maybe some of your future, stuff that you're going to put out? But is there anything that you're looking forward of jumping into? Is there anything that, as you look ahead to 2021, stands out as something you want to get involved in and start talking about?
For sure. It's been so crazy kind of watching the sport from afar, in a way where before I could take you through prelims up to the main event and I would know every single fighter's backstory. I would know everything about them. You know what I mean? I could just talk about literally any fight on the card. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I see some cards and I don't know the fighter at all. Like, the turnover on the roster has been absolutely insane to witness. And it really makes you appreciate people who are super dialed in, like you two, to the MMA space, and how much research and just constant regurgitation goes into that, and how you have to keep refreshing and resetting and everything. I mean, when I left in December of 2018. So you got to think, like, how much has changed since then. It's absolutely insane to watch. I mean, the Contender Series existed back then, but it wasn't remotely what it is now. And it hasn't created nearly the influx of new talent that it has now. So there's that. There's just all the turnover with champions and everything. Of course, I still tune in to watch the big fights, and I don't miss, good cards and things like that. I still follow the sport loosely, but it's just not like it was before. So it's really funny to think, like, am I still even a hardcore at this point? I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, I need to recapture that for sure. I need to get back into it at that point. But for me, and this is funny, talk about, am I even a hardcore, bro? But the big storyline for me is John Jones going to heavyweight. And I know that's the huge storyline for everybody, but I take it back to Madison Square Garden. I forget which card it was, but we were at a bar with Joe Silva one time, just chatting it up with Joe Silva. And we were just riffing, having some drinks and just riffing on our dream fights. And Joe Silva, for anybody like who's never met him, just an awesome freaking guy, awesome matchmaker of the UFC for years and years, helped build them into what they are. But we were just riffing on fights that we wanted to see. And this had to be, 2015, 16 range, I would say. Mm-hmm. And he said that the one that he always wanted to do was John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And that was back then.
Wow.
So what's funny is how well that fight has aged even now, because at the time I was like, dude, that's the fight for me too. Like, that, when he said it, I was like, now that you put it out there, I need to see that. Like, I just need to know, because there's so many ways that Stipe could neutralize John, and there's so many ways that John could neutralize Stipe. And I just genuinely have no idea how that fight would go, but I just got to know. So ever since then, that's been like the fight for me. So now that John moving to heavyweight is like a reality, man, that's it. And I know he's probably not going to warm up with Stipe. My monitor just went black. My monitor was like, quit talking about this. We're taking it. But yeah, I know he's probably not warming up with Stipe, but the fact that fight could happen in 2021 is like the most exciting thing that could ever happen in the UFC for me.
Yeah, I it's funny that you kind of segued into my next question too. So like as far as you know, that's a fight that stands out to you as that could be happening in the future with everything going on. But like as you're making your return, I'm sure you've already started dipping your toes in the water to see what's been happening or what's happening. Did you have any opinion or any take on all the not because obviously they weren't cut, but like Anthony Johnson, Yoel Romero, and Anthony Pettis going to PFL. Yeah. Like this is something. The names like this going to where the places they've gone to was something that you couldn't even really think about back when you were back then, and now you see it happening. I mean, when you saw that news pop up, what was your reaction?
It's so weird to fathom that, man. It's going to be weird watching them fight outside the octagon. They're UFC fighters, and especially guys like Yoel and even Pettis, coming off a great win. It's not like these guys are washed. They're fine. It's just the state of, and we've known this even when I left. Like, we've known that there was going to start to become some parity among the organizations, and where, being a Bellator fighter is no longer means that you're second rate. Like, people understand that now, and that's great. That's my favorite thing about it, is like, just because you're in PFL doesn't mean you're not UFC quality. Sometimes, of course, it might mean that, but there's some guys in PFL that can beat plenty of UFC fighters, and I think everybody understands that now. So I think that's really cool to see this kind of development, and Bellator obviously being the big one, the big kind of second place guy. I like seeing that people understand that the UFC isn't the be all end all, because as you guys remember at Flow Combat, like, we were always about the prospects and always about who's up and coming and why these guys matter. And we would constantly get people responding to our articles being like, why do I care about this guy? And I'm like, this guy could be that guy on the UFC pay-per-view in 3 years if you just give it time. Like, they all start somewhere, and their story is unique because of that. Like, anybody, man, and I've said this a lot, anybody who chooses cage fighting as a profession deserves your respect. Like, just on a surface level, there's a surface level of respect that goes into that, because it's nuts. Like, you don't want to do that. This is no way to live. But these guys willingly choose this, and they love it. They embrace it. The grind that they put into that. Like, a lot of people will never understand the grind that a fighter has, and I personally don't understand the grind a fighter has, because I choose not to. I know I'm not cut out for it, so I don't want to do that. So I just think it's cool to see, when you see like a Romero go to Bellator, it's like no longer the smear that it once was. And that's just awesome to see. So I think even as we move forward in 2021, that'll become even less prevalent. People will just understand there's great fighters all over the world, man. They don't have to be in the UFC to be good anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be interesting to see the continuation of this, and we had Chris Lytle on a couple weeks ago. And he, without saying in so many words, basically mentioned that for MMA fighters to truly be peak MMA fighters, there usually was some kind of PED. That was a big part of the history of the sport. Now we have legitimate drug testing, whatever anybody's take is on OSADA. So I wonder if we're going to see a trend now where if guys are really truly getting drug tested, like an Anthony Pettis in 2004. Might be able to fight till he's 45 years old.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start seeing bigger names now kind of cut by the UFC, because they make a good amount of money and they really can't stretch these guys' careers out like they did so much in the earlier years of the sport. So I wonder if this is going to become a trend where we're guys now, when they truly are kind of hitting the over the hill. I mean, historically, we've always thought like 34, 33, 35, like you're at the downside of your career. I wonder if that's going to start showing itself more now, again, that we have more strict drug testing at the top of the sport. So
it's a super interesting layer, man. I mean, that's something to track, obviously. And like the inverse of that is, I've seen, pictures of Vitor training for his fight in one, and it's like, okay, he's back to being TRT.
Exactly.
Like, okay, I see what happened here. But the thought of Romero on Juice. What is going to happen there? What? There's going to be a different species in that Bellator cage.
That's what I'm saying. Let's do Romero Rumble and Ryzen.
Oh, God.
Let's just cut the bullshit out completely.
Hey, listen, I'm here for that. You guys know me. I'm so 100% here for that.
Yeah.
All that.
You know, I have to piggyback on Matt's question, actually, because he brought up something that I did some stuff with some of the guys from Sure Dog yesterday on another podcast. They haven't published it yet, so it's just kind of it's not a question, but it's something that I brought up on it, and I feel like Matt just kind of mentioned something too. That I don't know if you caught wind of it, and I mean, this is me getting a little corny because I'm bringing up the class action lawsuit that's moving forward. Forbes wrote a pretty lengthy article about it, and one of the things that I'm just wondering, and now I'm just curious of what your opinion is. Do you think all these names, big names, and the cuts that are coming have something to do with the fact that they probably caught wind of the lawsuit moving forward about the monopoly and all that stuff, and letting these bigger names go and pursue free agency with all these other promotions that are kind of well enough to afford these fighters? I'm just wondering if it's a chess game by the UFC to say, look, we're not as bad as this suit saying we are. Look at what these guys are doing. Yeah. So I mean, this is actually for both of you, Matt, because I wanted to mention it to you too. I mean, but Hunter, if do you think that has something to do with it? I know like Ali Act and all that stuff was kind of just the whispers back when you were with Flo and stuff like. But I don't know. Do you think that? Well, what's your opinion on it? I'm being a tinfoil hat guy right now.
Listen, man, I like the tinfoil hat, and I like where your head's at with this one because this is not an avenue I've thought of prior to right now. So I appreciate you bringing it up because it makes a lot of sense. Like you said, if Anthony Pettis is in PFL and Romero's in Bellator, how much of a monopoly are we really? So it's an interesting little avenue that the UFC could potentially play off of. But I feel like more than that, it's just kind of what I was saying before. This was the natural progression of the sport. Big fighters were jumping before that. It's just that now they are getting a little older. They're getting past their prime. I think back to like when I was really into it, the Yushin Okami cut, when they cut him, I remember people lost their minds because it was like, oh, he's fine. He's a middleweight, like this perennial middleweight contender. He never won the belt, but he's always right there. John Fitch was the next one. Why would you ever cut John Fitch? Mm-hmm. How could you possibly let him go? I think we're just seeing that in a different form nowadays, and it just seems like it stings more because instead of Okami and Fitch, now you've got Pettis and Romero and guys like that, and it's like these are higher level fighters, but that's the natural evolution of the sport. The bad fighters are better than they were in 2015. Like that's just the whatever you want to call it. Like the waterline is just higher now to even get in the UFC to begin. So it seems more dramatic now. So I mean, dude, I don't know if it has a thing to do with the lawsuit, but I will say, these fighters and specifically their managers who are helping make these decisions, at least if not outright making them for them, they would know. They would definitely know what they're doing if that's the case. So I'm not taking that off the table, but I also think it's hasty to say that definitely is what is happening. But I think it's hey man, if you want to dig in and do some journalism on that, it's a good story.
I don't know if I feel like the lawsuit has its own facts, that are based off of a couple years ago. But if you were the UFC and you had a feeling like you were going to be dishing out some cash to some people, you might be looking to cut some high contracts. I mean, we have seen the influx you mentioned in the Contender Series. It's one thing to have one fighter make it from each show, but when you start having like 4 and 5 fighters get contracts on each show, for every 4 and 5 fighters they bring in, that's usually a couple that are seen out their way out the door. And if the UFC can, we talk about Pete Romero is one of those freaks who has these, who's a physical freak going into his older age, but for what the UFC has to pay him for one fight, they can pay 25 of these Contender Series guys. Yeah. And with they put out that video. We talked about it a little last week, and we joked about what we thought was funny and interesting on it. But one thing I said is I don't necessarily believe the numbers, because if you believe those numbers, you're not necessarily, if you're the UFC, thinking about cutting bait at the top of your thing. So, without seeing the pay-per-view numbers, like we used to get better reads when it was on cable and stuff. All these numbers now to me are just numbers. They don't mean it until I see somebody, kind of from the outside going, "Hey, that's really what the UFC made." I don't believe it's any more propaganda than the video that was put out, in its entirety. So
yeah.
But I do feel like if the lawyers and the stockholders and stuff in UFC were going, "Hey, we might have to come up with, a couple $100 million here," or whatever the hell the number is, it might be good to start getting rid of some of our aging fighters before they really start costing us.
100%.
And we only get a 2-minute fight out of Romero, and all of a sudden Pettis starts getting knocked out in a minute. That doesn't make them their $250,000 that they're paying those guys to fight. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I kind of root for the lawsuit because you're always pulling for the fighters and you want stuff to explode. And like you said, if PFL and all these guys can afford these guys, that's only good for the sport. Because most of us can remember back to the WEC, Strikeforce, Pride, Affliction, UFC, days when it was like you just had super cards going on, across the globe. So
yeah,
and that goes.
Yeah, and it always helps the guys too when they leave the UFC and they have their first fight outside. It like extra hypes it, like everybody's going to be way excited to see what Romero does in Bellator now, more so than maybe they would have been for his next UFC fight if it wasn't for the belt. So I think it even helps their careers in many ways from just a brand and reach perspective. Me, Anthony Pettis, if he's getting in the PFL tournament, A, my money is on Anthony Pettis to win it, and B, I want to see it happen. Like, I'm excited by that possibility that these things that were off the table before are now back on the table. So it spices up the sport in general. Like you said, like the Affliction, Elite XC days where you could flip on any random card and you'd be like, oh, this card's sick. Like, I'm just so intrigued by at least 3 or 4 of these fights. So it's cool to see that happening now again, where it's not all just in the UFC. And as much as I love the UFC, and they're obviously still the tippy top of the iceberg in general is way more above water than it's ever been. So that's just cool to see.
Hey, I got, just because we mentioned Yoel Romero like 10 times already, but have you talked to him, ever interviewed him in the past?
I haven't actually. No? That's crazy.
I always bring it up. I mean, Matt's probably tired of hearing about it, but that dude is a house. Like, I'll never forget. I think it was it 217 or 230 when he was walking around the theater in Madison Square Garden, and I saw him from far away, and he was literally like a noticeable figure inside of the theater because of how big he is.
Yeah.
The fact that he makes 185 is just,
it doesn't even make sense.
No, but
I always like hearing fighters talk about him in a fight. Like I remember Luke Rockhold saying he felt like he was made out of concrete. And I was just like, that's the craziest description ever. Like, imagine being locked in a cage with a guy and like you try to grapple him, like you just clinch him and you're like, oh shit, this guy feels like a column of concrete. Like, this is not gonna be good for me.
No, it's. I think it's going to be a scary time in Bellator with Rumble Johnson and him there. I mean, I don't know if he's caught that meme that I think I said. I know Matt's seen it. The Corey Anderson video he put up with the kitty and the cookies.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much probably how that whole division has to feel right now.
Unreal. I mean, you want to talk about just like, they're not the best fighters ever, but they are definitely 2 of the scariest fighters ever. And there's something to that. There's something just to that mystique of, I don't like, even if I win, this is not going to be fun. That kind of guy would just suck.
Yeah. Well, if you look at his fights with Whitaker, I mean, like Whitaker had to take like a whole year off almost both times.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you sacrifice a part of yourself to beat those guys.
Yeah.
And one of the secret ways, or not secret ways of making money in MMA, but the smartest way that I've ever seen for the path is the guys to become Bellator champions and then work their way to the UFC. I mean, you see it with Chandler, you saw it with Alvarez. Those are 2 of the guys who signed 2 of the bigger free agent contracts in the history. Overeem being another one of them who worked the circuits to get to the UFC and then really cash in. To me, the winner in the Romero Rumble thing is Nemkov. Because now you've got a guy in Bellator he just wiped out Bader, and now he's got names like he's got Mousasi, Romero, and Rumble that he can go through. You clean the table with those 3 guys, become a free agent. You're going to be the hottest prospect in a long time in a light heavyweight division that has been hungry. Yep. Will be hungry, especially at that point. I imagine if Jones stays at heavyweight. but Nemkov could be the one who turns this into a huge payday in the long run. And I mean, he has the most to gain, I think, out of those names joining the roster over there.
Yeah, you nailed it completely there at the end, especially because he's a light heavyweight. That's always been a money division, I think, historically in the UFC. When I was first getting into the sport, it was Chuck versus Tito, and then it was Rashad and Forrest and everybody else, Machida in there. And that was just the division. That was the place to be. And John Jones kind of came and took over and just owned the place. So it wasn't as fun for a while. It was still amazing to watch his dominance, but it wasn't the same kind of mix of contenders. So I think, like you said, with Nemkov, like, it's really interesting to imagine what he can do now if he does run the table. If he beats those guys, man, you can already hear the super fight headlines that are going to be coming and everything. Mm-hmm. Like, that's going to be the spiciest that division has been since Jones took over. So it's something I haven't thought of, man. That's cool to hear you bring it up, because now I need that.
Well, it's funny. I mean, okay, you guys are making your return to the MMA space, 2021, and it's funny because you guys did do a pretty interesting interview with Kyoji Horiguchi, who's headlining. He's one half of the main event at Rising 26, which I always call it the new Pride.
Yeah.
They're doing their New Year's Eve thing, so it's funny. Like y'all are coming back, and Horiguchi's coming back after his getting his knee rested and fixed to kind of correct the history he's got with his opponent, Kai Asakura. Is that right, Matt? Am I saying his name right? Kai Asakura? Yeah. And so it's just, I just feel like it's a funny coincidence. I mean, is that something on your radar because you're coming back into the space, or you're familiar with one of the fighters? Yeah. What's your take on that fight?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Horiguchi's got to get the win back from this guy first. You can't go to Rise and get knocked out by this guy. That was not a great look for Horiguchi, who many people thought was going to just run the table in Rise and just be the man over there and do everything. And obviously he had his great fights and has looked very good and got caught. But this is that moment, GSP versus Sarah, whatever you want to call it. Like, if Horiguchi wants to cement himself as the top level fighter that everybody believes he is, he's got to get this win back. So that makes this fight extremely exciting to me, to see what kind of adjustments he can make, what he can do the second time around. But I feel like Horiguchi is one of those guys, man. When we were down at ATT, it was crazy to see the way his teammates talked about him. Poirier, Masvidal, Joanna, Amanda Nunes, like anybody that you asked about Horiguchi, they were like, he's the best guy in this gym. Like, he's the most talented fighter out of anybody here, 100%. And when we were there were two people that were there the entire time. And it was Colby Covington. Dude, we were there for like 16 hours that day. Like, it was insane how long we were there. So, like, the second we walked in at 8 a.m. or whatever it was, Colby was there, Horiguchi was there. When we left that night, however many hours later, Colby was there, Horiguchi was there. Like, these guys put in the work, and like, to witness that firsthand was just a totally different level, because it wasn't just sparring, it was strength and conditioning, then it was striking, then it was grappling, then it was wrestling, then it was sparring. Like, just that day I don't even understand how you have the energy to go through that day, honestly. Yeah. And to know that that's what these guys go day in, day out and do, and that's how they get where they are, it's amazing. So Horiguchi, to me, like, it's always interesting when you get to a professional level. Like, one thing that's always interested me is, like, any UFC fighter is the top 1% of all fighters, period. But then you get to the 1% of the 1%, like, that's where the truly elite and special talent lives. And that's where I think a guy like Horiguchi occupies, and just doesn't get the respect and the love that I feel like he deserves. But when you hear other professionals and other people who are at that level or very near it talk about him the way they do, it just adds another dimension to this guy. So anytime Horiguchi fights, man, I'm all in on it. And if you guys haven't watched the interview yet, you have to watch that Flow Combat interview with Dwayne and Horiguchi, because Horiguchi knows like 3 words in English. So it's just hilarious. Like, he was such a good sport about it and had so much fun with it. You can hear King Mo in the background giving him crap. So it's just, it was an awesome interview. Like, once again, not to see the way they respect Horiguchi as a fighter, which they all do, but the way they interact with him as a human being and just love his personality and everything is just infectious down there. So the Gooch is the man.
No, gotta look forward to it. the one thing that's been pretty constant, despite the ups and downs in the MMA world, has been New Year's Eve in Japan.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe there was 1 year or 2 years where we went without it, but they've kind of gone away from the freak show fights, which is something that was a staple in the early days. And this card for Ryzen really is kind of it's got all their stars. I know a lot of people, you got to be pretty hardcore. That you mentioned being a hardcore fan earlier. Or in the early days, being a hardcore fan meant you were following like 4 organizations and knowing what was going on in your local scene. To be the hardcore fan now, like you literally, there's hundreds of events going on every weekend, and it's just so there's different levels to this. But you mentioned Horiguchi. I feel like he kind of falls into the old school loss. Like back in the day, guys used to bounce from UFC to Pride to Shudo to Pancrase to Rumble on the Rock. And then dudes would get title shots even coming off losses because you didn't know that, Gomi went to Hawaii to fight BJ Penn and Jens Pulver's fighting Ludwig. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like he kind of got lost. He could have played it safe. The easiest thing for him would have just been to stay in Japan, keep doing that, but he's steady, tests himself. He fights the Bellator fighters coming over in Caldwell. Then he goes to New York and then he fights. I think that was in June, if I remember the dates kind of in order. And then, in like 3 months later, he's fighting this Asakura kid who's a up and coming, basically a street fighter out of the streets of Japan. But a major, him and his brother are big stars there. And he gets caught. And then he blows his knee out while he's preparing for a rematch. And then we've had this whole year now of nothing. So I feel like he's kind of the guy who started the resurgence a little bit in the 125 weight class. When Demetrius kind of didn't disappear, but when he went to one, he basically fell off the map for a little bit of the scene. And I feel like Horiguchi's fights became that exciting, competitive fights. And now he's with Figueiredo and Garbrandt dropping down in divisions and Moreno and Roy. That's the UFC scene, but even in Bellator with Archuleta and Mix and all these guys, a win here for Horiguchi really puts him right back on the top of that mountain, as you say, of the 1% of the 1%. And again, I don't know if he makes his way back to the UFC, but you start getting super fight talk again when a guy who's the Bellator and Ryzen champion essentially is walking around.
Well, I'm way here for that, man. I love super fights. I always have. I like, and also you mentioned the freak show fights, which I also love. So it's kind of sad that those are gone because they're just fun. I have nothing against fun, man. Like this is, at the end of the day, it's still fighting and it's still entertainment. Like I still expect to be entertained when I watch a card, and I know a lot of fighters do understand that. And there's a lot of mixed emotions on that. I understand when a guy wants to grind down his opponent and get the win as well, because I know what that means for your career and how much that means not just for your career, but also for your wallet. So I understand that side of things too, but I respect a good freak show fight as well. But Horiguchi, like you say, the intrigue about a super fight to me is that it strikes the same entertainment level as a freak show fight while also being the super highest level of competition possible. So that's the beauty of the super fight and what the situation Horiguchi finds himself in. So down the line, I was already thinking that as well, man. I was like, how long until he's challenging, like coming back into free agency and challenging the UFC, whoever's at the top at that point, to make his comeback? Because even the fight against Mighty Mouse, Horiguchi was so green back then. He had his moments. I'm not saying anybody thought he was winning the fight up to, get submitted at the very last second. I'm not saying anybody thought he was winning or anything, but there was enough there that you were like, man, this kid shouldn't have had a chance, but he actually showed some stuff. Like Horiguchi has been at that level forever. So I would like to see it just out of pure, selfish, put a cap on it. I want to know how he would do again. I want to see him win that UFC belt. But also right now, we need to just understand it's also really fun what's happening right now. Like this kind of rematch, grudge match, like you said, you get caught. Like I called it earlier, GSP Sarah. I don't know that anybody necessarily thinks that Kai is the much better fighter, but he definitely caught Horiguchi there and won, definitively and fairly. So now it's up to Horiguchi to prove that he can bounce back and dominate him. It's for me, and this is something that people I've noticed on Twitter, everything since I've been away, I've noticed a lot of people don't think this way. So correct me if you guys don't either. But like when a guy gets knocked out in a minute or 2 minutes, I don't hold that against him too much. People seem to think that that's like, oh, you got your ass kicked so bad, bro. You got knocked out in a minute. It's like, no, you got caught. Like, that happens. If you beat me for 25 minutes straight and just dominate a decision, that's when you lose. That's when I saw, dude, you had nothing for that guy. Like, you didn't have a chance. Yeah. That's the bad loss to me. And people think that a decision loss isn't as bad, but for me, like, the 2-minute knockout, man, that shit happens. Like, you watch the sport enough, you're going to see it happen. So I don't necessarily hold it against Horiguchi, but I'm interested. I'm definitely interested to see how he'll bounce back.
Yeah, it's funny. Just talking about the whole state of MMA from when you kind of left and now coming back into it. One of the things that happened, and I feel like I remember both you and Dwayne having a reaction when it happened, was when Horiguchi was the champ, Bellator and Rising champ. I mean, if he picks up a win, I mean, we've seen, I mean, and Matt mentioning Mighty Mouse, just this is me going, I'm getting crazy right now because I'm drinking and talking fights. But one of the things I'm thinking of is, okay, obviously Sakaki Barra is cool with cross promoting, and Scott Coker's cool with it. I mean, I feel like the way the sport's growing now, and everyone's trying to compete with, or at least maybe try to outshine the UFC. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to see maybe one throws Demetrius Johnson a one-off and be like, why don't you test yourself against if Horiguchi wins, why don't you guys go at it again? Like Matt said, he was green back then, but now it's it's a different story. I mean, the sport has grown so much. I think we can get crazy. Now, it's not a freak show fight. It's a legit competitive match.
Right, dude. How fun is that? I love the idea, and I love. I mean, obviously, I would love to see that fight. I would love to see Horiguchi finally get 800 billion eyeballs on him with one, because according to one, that's how many people. Horiguchi finally gets the respect he won.
They're broadcasting to Jupiter.
Exactly. It's like, dude, there's literally not as many people on Earth as they say watch their fights. So I don't understand what's happening there, but it's fine.
I do. Yeah, we talked. We said there's a lack of freak show fights, but if you look down the card, there is one gift from the MMA gods that they're giving us. Manoa Man returns to Ryzen. You want to talk? I mean, that's New Year's Eve right there. And he's fighting a heavyweight. The dude started fighting in 1996.
Unreal. I can't like you said the name. I'm like, it can't be the same guy, right?
It's a Super Hulk champion. This is,
that's beautiful.
I mean, that's incredible. Just the grit. It's his listed fights. This would be his 116th MMA bout.
That's hard to. I can't you can't even fathom that. That's a whole different level. That's a Travis Fulton level. You've reached Travis Fulton status at that point.
God, but this is all takes down tomorrow. What I think the start time is about midnight Eastern time tomorrow night.
Something crazy like that. But before, there's a couple other fights. I mean, the Gomi versus they're doing that special striking rules. I don't know what they are, but that's like a special match for Gomi, and I forget his opponent's name, but there is a sleeper on the card. I know it's a lot of talent that people are unfamiliar with, but Shinobu Ota versus Hideo Tokoro. I have a feeling that fight is going to be like if you've never seen, I think it's Bellator 136. I should have looked at. I have it saved on my DVR. I should have looked.
Yeah.
Hideo Tokoro fought LC Davis in Bellator. And that fight was kind of like, I remember standing on my feet in my old apartment, just cheering because of how good the fight was, because of the action.
That's
back
awesome.
And forth in it. I mean, LC Davis, his jaw at the end of the fight, the bottom of his jaw was broken when he did his interview with Jimmy Smith, and Jimmy Smith came back on the mic and was like, all the bottom teeth are gone. And then and he won the fight. Davis won the fight.
Yeah.
So the guy he's fighting in Ota is like some standout wrestler from Japan that I think I don't know if that's his debut. I think it might be his MMA debut or his pro MMA debut. But the dude is I shared a highlight footage of him wrestling where he flips the dude in a wrestling match. He just tosses him straight off the mat. Yeah. So I feel like we're gonna see something crazy there on that level of the type of the type of MMA we're used to seeing from Japan. So I just want to put that out there. I feel like that fight is not on enough people's radar.
That's awesome. I love it, man. I love when a card goes deep and provides that intrigue on a different level. Like that is clearly not a title fight, but sometimes just fights with a storyline like that are the ones that get me. Like I just want to, it goes back to like the foundation of the UFC when guys just wanted to know what martial art would reign supreme. Like I'm still super intrigued by that. Like I still don't think we have an answer. Isn't that like something funny to think about? You know, this many years later, that was the great question, but you still can't definitively say this long ahead, you know, what martial art's the best. I still don't know. So I'm still super interested whenever it is like a clear stylistic mashup like that.
You know, and only in Japan does Takaro, who's fought everybody from Royler Gracie to Hoist Gracie to Kron Gracie to, you know, everybody. I mean, I saw him fight Brad Pickett in a K1 event in 2006, I think, out here in California. You know, he's again got listed at 66 career fights, and he's fighting someone making their debut. I mean, nothing says Japanese MMA more than that. I mean, Japan didn't treat their judokas and their wrestling stars. If you thought you could beat somebody up, they made you prove it.
Right.
You're fighting one of the top guys. So,
yeah. And in pure MMA fashion, the crazy thing is Ota's probably going to smash him. He's probably just going to come out and look like a different species and just annihilate him in wrestling. Like
or he'll get caught with a flying triangle and be like,
right.
So awesome. Well, I mean, again, this is the Rizin's pay-per-view event. They did cut the cost. I think it's $24.99. Nice. And I think they're offering replays, which is good for the folk that can't pull the all-nighter. But for, you know, if you're not, you know, we got a little slow period now for MMA. So any fans out there that are looking just to get their fix and are not necessarily used to the Japanese scene, this is quite the experience if you've got the day off work and can do it. So I think that'll pretty much wrap us up. Check us all out at allaccessmma.com. Fans can follow me at MMAHawk21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Oldhead Carb on Twitch. Hunter, why don't you go ahead and throw out all your handles and ways for people to get a hold of you?
Sure. Thanks, man. I'm at Hunter A. Homistek on pretty much all social. So it's Hunter A. Homistek. Instagram, Twitter are usually the best. I'm also on Facebook and some other places, but all the action's on Instagram and Twitter. All the kids know that.
and obviously the Brawl Network, right? Because you got your.
Of course, I'm on Brawl Network now, so that'll be my new home. And the podcast with Dwayne Finley, Bow and Glow MMA show. I love the ring to that. First of all, I just I've liked saying it to people. You know, it's just nice. So I'm super excited. I can't wait for you guys to see some of these episodes we've got lined up. We're already working on our guest list. I promise you guys are not going to be disappointed. It's not necessarily going to be, you know, an MMA hour style where there's always a third guest or, you know, a couple fighters on every episode. We're going to include, you know, MMA journalists. You know, you guys will probably be on it if you accept the invitation. You know, I want to talk to everybody. I like hearing. Nice. I like that was easy. Easiest guest ever.
Yeah.
I want all angles of the industry, you know, coaches, managers, fighters. Like I said, I'm not just in it for the clicks. I want to tell these stories. I want to do it right. I want people to understand what really goes into the sport behind the scenes. So I think the show is going to be interesting and different. People are going to love it. And as you know, Bo and I are kind of, we're fighter friendly. We were never super journalistic because in pure journalism, you have to be unbiased and you have to, you know, keep all your fandom out of it. We're going to be fans on this show. Like, don't get it twisted. We're going to be fans of these guys and talk to them like we're having beers and hanging out, not like we're interviewing them in the cage after the fight. So I think it's going to be interesting for a lot of people, and you'll get to see some different sides of these people. Jim Miller will probably show up naked and sing a Careless Whisper on a stream or something. So you can expect that for sure. So I'm excited, guys, and I appreciate you giving me the chance to kind of talk about it and have a little platform to help launch it off here.
All right, cool. Awesome. Well, happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year, Matt. Happy New Year, Hunter. I guess that's that, right? We'll see you in 2021.
There it is. Happy New Year, guys.